Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. Welcome back to Organizing in the Time of COVID-19. My name is Feroz Manji from Daraja Press. You may recall that one of our earliest interviews was with Kali Akuno, who is a co-founder of Cooperation Jackson. And we talked a lot about the situation and the challenges of organizing in the time of COVID in Jackson, Mississippi. Today, we're going to get an update on that, also on Kali's proposal about organizing a general strike in the USA. But the main part of what we will be talking about today will be on what COVID-19 tells us about the nature of racism and white supremacy in the USA. So a warm welcome to you, Kali. I hope all is going well with you and yours. You've been involved in a lot of organizing. If the evidence on Facebook and elsewhere is anything to go by. Would you like just give us start off with just a quick update on where we are from our discussions about Jackson, Mississippi over the last couple of weeks? What's going on there?
Yeah. Well, in terms of, I'll start with our direct work. The mass challenge is going well. We're now at a place and a pace where we're producing, multiple versions of the mass. We're never going to be able to meet the actual demand, unfortunately, if not only just for shortage of various materials, which are quickly running. And stuff like that is running out, but that we've kind of, in the span of 2.5-3 weeks, we've perfected a method of doing the 3D printed masks. So we're starting to crank those out. We just ordered some new machines to kind of double up on that production, thanks to a lot of generous donations from folks all around the world. Many thanks to you all, for helping us increase our capacity and be able to service the needs of the people. So that's been a joy. In a broader sense, since we last spoke, the governor filed suit with issuing finally a stay-at-home order. But that was maybe a week and a half ago now, after the Republican kind of stronghold and the mythology really broke that this wasn't much more than a bad flu. Once that finally kind of broke, Florida kind of started leading the way. Then that was followed by Mississippi and several other states. But, they are already in dialogue, in discussion, emanating all the way from the top with the right-wing kind of reactionary forces, starting to a dialogue about how they're going to open up the country with a bang, presumably sometime in May. And it looks like Mississippi and Texas maybe some of the test runs to start doing that earlier. Meanwhile, the number of infections is steadily going up. The number of deaths is kind of plateaued, thankfully, here to a degree. I think we're getting close to 100. So it's nowhere near what's happening, on our southern western border of the state of Louisiana. But we think that that's going to increase with the practices of them encouraging folks to go back to work, and for shops and everything to go back in order, and that the death rate will spike again. We think that we're in this for many, many months, despite what they say, and that a second wave of this is likely coming, definitely in Mississippi, but probably also nationally. Now, in terms of the response, there are now starting to be relief efforts cropping up throughout the city and throughout the state as people are kind of building their confidence, building the solidarity and engaging, in direct work. Now, how safe some of this is, to be honest with you, is questionable, but it is happening. I think it's a human response, a positive human response, that people see people in need, people suffering, and they want to help. So that's a good thing. Definitely taking place in many, many different spots throughout the city and throughout the states as we get caught up there. We ourselves think we've perfected enough of a methodology around doing at least some food distribution and some resource distribution safely to make sure that none of our people will get sick. So we're going to start launching some of the relief efforts that we had planned on doing about 4 weeks back. We're going to start putting that in motion by the end of next week to accompany kind of our mass distribution. So, in those regards, there's, you got the positive dimension of the people's response, and then you got the ongoing reactionary dimension of, these right-wing forces and the combination of, these libertarians, big oil barons, and the religious right really pushing us in two opposite directions right now, which I think mirrors what's going on basically throughout the United States.
I mean, I'm really impressed the way you organize, and you are getting this food distribution going. You're looking after the community, but also, initiatives like your 3D mask production. I mean, is anyone else doing a thing like that in the sort of cooperative movement across the USA?
You got a little choppy on me, and your screen is a little
okay.
fuzzy.
No, I was just saying how impressive it is that you are organizing in such a way to get food distribution going, as well as this production of 3D masks using a 3D printer. I think that's really impressive. Do you know of similar initiatives in the USA amongst the cooperative movement? It seems to be having trouble. Okay.
One of our signals, I think, is a little bit weak. I'm trying to move closer to mine to see if that'll help.
Okay. Well, let's move on. I mean, the main thing we were wanting to focus on today. Lost you. I'm sure he'll be back once once he finds a decent internet connection. He was trying to speak from outside. Okay, here he is again. There you are. That looks a little better. Okay. So, Kali, what does the distribution of COVID-19 tell us about the nature of racism and white supremacy in the USA?
Well, I mean, where to begin on this one? I mean, look, one of the things that was, I think, most graphic that I've seen came out last night. And that is in the city of St. Louis. St. Louis, for those who know, is a kind of unique city in that it's a bunch of kind of little cities kind of strung together in one metro, kind of area. But in the city, all of the deaths, every single one of them have been a Black person. Now, if that doesn't shock you in the midst of this, I don't know what would or what will. And what it really speaks to really is the underlying structure of white supremacy in this society, that something like that is even possible. Because we know, like in that case, the number of folks who were actually infected, at least those that were counted, is there are more white folks who are actually been tested to be positive than there are black folks. So how does you account for all the black folks being the only folks who are dead? What we've seen, I think there's been an interesting study. I remember, I think it was in LA, something that the LA Times kind of looked into and investigated around, how the deaths were playing out and why there. And what was clearly indicated there in this study was that the vast number of black folks who succumbed to this virus in LA County were not tested, and that they were rejected from being tested, that they were just denied being given a test. And that is purely up to the systemic and cultural dimensions of racism, wherein just harkens back to some of the studies that have taken place in the medical field over the past decade that focus on that. Doctors read and register the pain of black women to be far different than almost anybody else, saying that they can obviously in their minds bear more pain than other folks, and they just don't believe that their pain and our pain is real. And it just harkens back to the view of us as chattel, basically, and that somehow we're built to take more pain and suffering, or that it's kind of our I guess burden, according to some of the biblical understandings, to bear this particular type of ire from the system. But it's playing out in graphic terms, and it's we need to be clear that it's not just folks who are technically black, although that's disproportionate, but it also, if you look at the number of infections in indigenous lands on the different reservations, particularly looking at some of the stuff that's taking place on the Navajo Nation lands and how it's spreading there, and why it's spreading there, as a nature of some of the chronic dimensions of underdevelopment caused by the colonial occupation of all their lands and territories, and the lack of development there, where there's really no running water in a lot of the homes on the reservation. So if the prescription is wash your hands constantly, can't do that if you don't have any running water. Then you also look at the rate of impact amongst the Latino community, particularly in New York City, which, there's some overlap between in the United States what we consider Black and Latino, just given the history of enslavement, particularly in the Caribbean, where most of your like Dominicans and Haitians, Puerto Ricans, folks are coming from and are situated in New York City. But then there's another dimension to this, right? So that's just the aspects of who's getting sick and who's dying. We got to look at the underlying reasons why people are getting sick in the first place. And I'll start with the low wage labor, which is now being deemed essential in this country. And who's doing that labor, right? Who's working at the food processing plants, the meat plants, the chicken plants, the pig plants, the fish, plants, the slaughterhouses of the cows. Who's working in the fields? Who's working at these distribution plants at Amazon? Who's working at these counters in most of your grocery stores? And who are a lot of your nurses? These are Black and brown folks, right? In most of these now essential positions, the vast majority of whom do not have union protections, the vast majority of whom are barely making minimum wage, the vast majority of whom, almost the complete majority of whom, do not have any form of health care that's provided either by their employer, nor can they afford it working on minimum wage jobs. And remember, the minimum wage in most parts throughout the United States is below $15 an hour. So you're now set up in a situation where the very divided, apartheid, tiered workforce that is now being deemed essential is also being deemed by virtual reality as being disposable. So the disposable nature and the rotating nature of labor and who does their labor, who bears the brunt of it, along the lines of race, are playing out in the extreme, and this is only going to continue. If you particularly look in a place like New York, where very quickly the disease started being focused on those sectors of workers, but also how it started to hit the MTA workers, the bus drivers and the subway drivers, who are basically all, I think it's something like 85% black and brown, and even though that's a unionized job and has offered some level of security, it's still draws upon folks from the working class who are in desperate need due to lack of access to education, access to loans and other things in the society, so that they can become your infamous New York entrepreneur, who are bearing the brunt of that and having to carry all these essential workers, all these black and brown folks, to and from their jobs at the hospitals, at the stores, at the factories, at the plants. So this is really, COVID-19 is really just exposing America, I think, really for what it is, how it functions, who upholds this society and what their value really is. If anything, I think this disease is really calling that into question. And is doing so, I think, in ways that, one, I think people are learning in reality what the digital age can and cannot do, and that how much of the economy, the real economy, where people eat and draw their substance from, the real economy is still very much dependent on various types of manual labor. But how long this lasts is becoming, I think, a question. And we're already seeing some ways in which I think Amazon perhaps leading the way, where they're trying to factor in on the heels of this to mute the resistance that's now starting to be mounted by workers throughout, say, the Amazon system, to speed up the pace of automation, to eliminate the need upon the disposable labor force that they already have, which are the black and brown workers that constitute the vast majority of the people in their factories all throughout, the U.S. empire. Yeah, I mean, we can, you can point this out in so many different ways, but this piece, I think, is really demonstrating that once this is over, the myth of kind of the meritocratic society, the myth of equal opportunity in the United States, I think, has been shattered, at least for a generation. It's going to be very hard for the reactionary forces, both within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, to kind of put that myth back together again, and say that they're moving toward the colorblind society, which is proven to be absolutely false by the dire consequences and outcomes of this virus.
Yeah, I mean, the shocking statistics of the disproportionate number of deaths from amongst the African American, the Black, Brown, indigenous population. I mean, what surprises me is how this fact is actually being talked about in the mainstream media. I thought they would try and hide it, but there have been a lot of articles in mainstream media about that. Now, what are the opportunities for organizing under these conditions? Because surely these communities all know what is happening to them. And what are the opportunities for organizing? How do you take this forward? Because otherwise, it seems to me, it's a form of eugenics. Our people will be killed. And we can't wait to see how bad this could become. What do you see as the way people are organizing? How is it happening, or is it not?
Well, I mean, we're starting to see, I think, some brilliant stuff going on throughout the country. There's like the mutual aid. I consider what we're doing right now still fundamentally within the mutual aid kind of perspective, right, in realm of organizing. And there's been a tremendous outpouring of that. But in terms of direct confrontation with the system, I think we're starting to see some brilliant stuff, and people just use their ingenuity and creativity. Um, you know, I'll cite one which I was very impressed with that happened yesterday. So in Oakland, California, there's a Black coalition there, the Black Housing Coalition there, staged basically a rent strike that they hosted on Facebook Live and Twitter Live and etc. And they were just hoping to get, I think I heard Carol say 50 people out. Several hundred people turned out, and they did this, I think, by occupying like a mall parking lot, and they had all the cars, people, paced out in cars so that they were maintaining and practicing social distancing. And most of the people I saw had, on various masks, many of which this coalition had been working on securing and distributing to the community for free over the past couple of months. And they did this rent strike action, encouraging folks to take up the cause of both not paying their rent, not paying their mortgages, and encouraging other folks in the community who are presently homeless, houseless, to start occupying the tons of vacant homes and lots that exist within Oakland as a result of all of the redlining and predatory lending and purchasing practices that corporations on a global scale are doing in communities like Oakland and San Francisco. Where to be more clear, there's tons of houses that exist in these communities that are bought up by sovereign wealth funds throughout the world and major corporations throughout the world that just sit idle, basically to be used as kind of Airbnb properties or just investment properties, that are just sitting idle. And even before this jumped off in starting in the same group that did this, was one of the key forces for the Moms for Housing struggle that emerged in the Bay Area in the end of last year, really at the kind of the beginning of the COVID crisis. If you link it back to 19, so it's kind of interesting now that you made me think about how these two are linked. But that same group did this action yesterday, and I think what they are doing is inspiring folks in that community. With staying connected, building the solidarity. They've already demonstrated a practice that they're willing to come together and defend each other if and when, the state decides to move in and try to evict people, that there's a mass unit prepared to respond at any moment's notice to defend folks in their right to housing. So this is just one of the many techniques that I think we've seen. We've seen folks supporting prisoners in San Diego, in New Orleans, demanding that folks get out, getting some folks out, also using this kind of car technique. There's also been demonstrated actions where folks are just keeping like their social distancing, from each other, people demanding. In Philadelphia, there was some action like that. That was one of the first car actions happened in Philadelphia. So people are finding ways to both stay healthy, to practice adequate social distancing, but to be in unity and solidarity with each other.
Right.
And as more of these pop off, I think it's demonstrated, is building people's strength and building people's confidence. And I've been honored to be on several calls with with workers in various fields who aren't, unionized, who have been struggling before the crisis, but who have been stepping up and doing more, to be connected with them, listening to their stories, sharing what little I can. Folks ask a question, but mainly just listening to folks who were not activists, at any point in their lives, who merely just went out to these low-end jobs because they needed to feed their families and take care of their children. Now really step up and understand and learn the system, how ruthless it is. I mean, which they already knew, but just coming to grips with, hey, we have to do something about this, and together that we can.
Yeah.
So the organizing possibilities, I think, are right. I mean, and folks are seizing it. It's not like myself or others are having to nudge people along. The reality is doing that. The reality of the situation, the
Yeah.
direness,
Yeah.
starkness, the ruthlessness of how the corporations and the government are exploiting people and just have a total disregard for their health and safety. That is the wake up call that everybody is getting, and people are responding to it. Now, I think we still have a long way to go to make this
Yeah.
more transformative. As people are waking up, their process is uneven as people's confidence builds about, what they can do and start to believe in the person next to them is actually going to have their back and stand with them and not going to fade away or not take the easy route and just take the basic compromises that are given. That's going to build over time. But, you know, um, this is one of the greatest in my life. This is the greatest teaching moment I've ever seen, witnessed, and that people are stepping into it. I think it's just emblematic of what we know humans have the capacity to do when pushed, when tested, and when tried. So that's one of the reasons why we've been kind of trying to bust our ass to pull together and encourage folks to start thinking more systematically about combined mass action and utilizing that as a means of just direct nonviolent action
Yeah.
to demonstrate our collective power
Yeah.
and change this society. The first thing is stopping them from bringing folks back to work too soon, right? That's the first thing to protect people, right? And to end this virus. That's the first thing that's on all of our minds. And why our call was from the beginning a reaction to Trump saying that he was going to, try to get people back to work today, right? Let's remember that he wanted a big opening on Easter,
Yeah.
the day Easter Sunday, and we see how that would have been a total calamity. And then why he responded to that again, I'll assert was it had to do with those nearly a million, doctors, 800,000, sending a letter. No, you cannot do that. And that was one of the first, I think, demonstrated acts of, as the old saying, direct
Yeah.
action gets the good, you know. But that's the first piece. But the second piece, and I think is the long-term piece, is like, look, we cannot go back to the way things were. Like there is no going back. That would be another disaster. And the way things were is what put us here in this position in the first place. The way things were is why so many Black people are being negatively impacted in the way that they are. The way things were are why we have so many Black and brown deaths. And so we're not going back. I mean, that's the clear message that we're trying to send. And we know that we aren't, because the other side of the equation, the capitalists are already trying to exploit the situation to the hilt. And best believe as things calm down and over time, and they learn how to do more of these meetings through digital means, that they're going to exploit that to the greatest extent possible to try to break worker solidarity and worker collective interest in collective action and reorganize things, to be far more flexible for themselves, to make us all much more precarious and disposable. So we cannot allow them to do that, particularly in the situation now where through the nature of the essential work that's being carried out, we see how vital and essential that is. So clearly, labor has the upper hand right now, and part of our push is to get people to both see that, understand that, and use that as an effective kind of leverage and tool uh, to be able to change society in some profound ways, to make sure that adequate universal health care, to make sure that there's adequate universal education, child care, that there's protection for workers to the fullest, both for their health and safety, but also, guaranteed income should uh, uh, folks not be able, for one reason or another, to work to their full, kind of capacity. And then the deeper things is really transforming, the nature of what labor is in this society, so that workers are actually in control, democratic control of their workplace and there are no bosses, so because we work to eliminate them and transform the society towards the kind of the socialist outcomes that we need, and where there's actually a material basis for that to be executed to the highest degree, I think, at this point in time in history. So this is why we are pushing this call and encouraging everybody, to take it up, because I don't know when we'll ever get an opportunity like this again, that both exposes the pure fallacies of the situation, where its interests, are like, the Fed is still dropping basically, $1 billion a day, pumping that into, the system to prop it up, when they could be using that money all along to create a national healthcare system in this country. It's just
No,
one example.
no. I mean, I think what you're raising is a really important point. I mean, it's one which Arundhati Roy, the Indian author and novelist, raised recently, describing that we are entering a portal. That is to say, there's a contestation as to what happens in the outcome out of this crisis. There is no doubt that the ruling class is also looking at opportunities to what Naomi Klein calls the shock doctrine, to use this as a way of asserting their rule under the new period. So it's really encouraging to hear you talk about a situation where the possibilities of an alternative world, of an alternative way of living, of organizing, of producing, is something that is beginning to percolate. What's going to be needed to take it to the next level and open up a debate on a much broader scale, not within the USA and beyond?
Well, I mean, what's really needed at this point is broad outreach and education. Those are the two things I think. For us, we're trying to call for the first kind of coordinated mass action, and I stress the first because we think there's going to be many more of these needed to have maximum impact, for that to be on May Day. And that's both the historic reasons associated with May Day being very much tied to the labor movement as a key point of the struggle for labor emancipation, emanating from the strike action that took place in Chicago in the late end of the 19th century, but also because the first kind of order that Trump gave was supposed to expire April 30th, which puts the Friday this year, the first that they were trying to get people to kind of come back to work and open back the country on. They happened to put it on May Day. So we're trying to prevent that from happening, to send a clear message that it's too soon, and that if folks take heed to that, you'll see another, perhaps even more deadlier wave of this virus hitting more people. But it's the outreach to education. One of the things that's been funny about this to a degree is how much of the efforts, as kind of small as I would say that they are right now, are being monitored by Facebook and Twitter in particular. Some folks produced a flyer that went out, and I tried to post it on our Twitter account, about the action. Because remember, we are one force calling for it, but there were forces before us that called for a general strike that we didn't initially know about it, but have, kind of since found out, been dialoguing with, linking with, and trying to reach out to all the different forces that can be reached. But it's been interesting to just see in how that's being very strategically blocked, on Twitter, and it's saying that some of your media failed to load when I can load anything else. I can load ads. I can, just experiment things on the Twitter account. But anything that speaks to collective action is immediately blocked, Feroz. I mean, not like they wait and then take it down. On Twitter, it's immediate, and it just shows you the extent to which the aggregation and intelligence of these algorithms and big data, how effective it's become. That they can just automatically read certain things that nope, that's
Yeah.
not going up. We're not allowing that to be spread. So breaking this kind of blockade, through word of mouth, that's what I mean by outreach. We're going to try to use all the social media tools that we can and interviews like this as we can and kind of get the word out. But at the end of the day, it's still going to come down to humans calling humans, meeting with
Yeah. Yeah.
humans and saying, hey, we got to take this up. This is why, it's in our own interests. We got to protect ourselves. We got to protect
Yeah.
each other, protect our communities. Like that word of mouth spread, I think is still going to be the most effective way. And so we're trying to encourage, folks to get that out. Now we are having, you asked about some of the next steps. We had a call, our first kind of national organizing call, through a number of different contacts that we have. Open that up. We're having another call tomorrow, following the same process with folks who have reached out to the different organizations
Hmm.
and folks in their family, their communities, their churches, their mosques, their temples, the synagogues, everybody to reach out to them as well as folks in your workplaces, and saying, hey, we need to move collectively. So we'll get another sense tomorrow of kind of where we're at, who we're being reached. But it's been a wonder, to see how many spontaneous things are popping up. We've seen rent strike New York. I saw one Socialist Alternative is calling for a rent strike now in the Pacific Northwest, particularly up in Seattle. Saw that earlier this morning. Right to the City Alliance has been calling for a number of different things. People's bailout has been pushing stuff. So folks are in motion. I think the issue is, and the question is, can we combine all of this, right? Can
Yeah.
we link and connect and aggregate with each other? I think that's the question, and that's going to be the real test, I think, of us in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully, I think we are putting out a framework calling for a broad kind of unity without uniformity. Saying that, hey, we know that unfortunately, where we're at in this country, not everybody is going to line up with every single demand of each other's groups. Some people don't fully support all of prison abolition. Some folks don't fully support everybody being granted citizenship. Say, okay, look, I will struggle with you around those points individually. Based on me being an abolitionist and me believing there shouldn't be any damn borders. Period. We'll struggle with that. But at this point, if you're taking up a housing struggle, I'm going to support you. If you're taking up a struggle to defend immigrant rights and farm worker rights, I'm going to defend you. And let's stand in alliance with each other, build a relationship with each other, stand in solidarity with each other, through that process, get to know each other and building a collective power with each other. Like that's a process, that's going to take us some time to do. But I think us standing up, turning up, showing up for each other is the first critical step. And hopefully we can get millions of people committed to doing that on May 1st as a starting place towards building our collective power and our collective strength. And as we've been stressing and saying, we are, from our perspective, we are seeing this as a movement towards a general strike, right? I don't think that we will have enough collective strength to actually shut the country down on May 1st. I wish we could, but I don't think that's going to be possible, just given the limitations that I talked to you about how things can be spread during this period. Because still, it's easier to reach millions of people in this day and age through YouTube, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, which are all instruments that working class people don't control. These are all big corporate forces that have their own interests. They're going to suppress this information getting out, and they have all these algorithmic tools to do so. So we're going to try to use those, the master's tools, for what they're worth, knowing the limitations. But we know that's going to kind of put some breaks and limits on how many people who aren't in our immediate orbits might hear this message and get it out. So we see this as a building thing, and that in order for us to get towards, to realize a actual general strike, particularly on a national, and I would say, Feroz, you mentioned just the U.S., on an international level, because there were some international folks who joined the call, that this is ultimately going to have to be something that grows on an international scale, because capital knows no borders, and our strength and our power and our solidarity should also know none. So even though there's a U.S. kind of particular focus, a focus in place, if you would, it's not limited to that. At least not Cooperation Jackson's view of what we need and and the type of solidarity that we need and interest that we need collectively to move on. And it's not like this virus knows any borders, right? And so we need the same type of universal health care and universal resources everywhere, that we are asking for. And this is something we think that this quote unquote advanced civilization and all the tools and science and industry that we have could easily produce in this point in time, in fact, and do it in a more ecologically sound and sustainable way to eliminate all the waste that perpetuated even now, with the tons of food that's just being waste and disposal, which is also something that we're tracking, part because of not being able to distribute it, but also just the deep systemic parts of why certain things are why they're overproduced in the first place, how they're distributed inequitably, also, which are all different features of the capitalist imperialist system, which is now coming into play. Was reading just yesterday, some new reports around some of the staple food stuff, probably another wave of what's going to have an impact on a global scale, that the cost of rice and the cost of wheat is starting to go up. We may see that aggregate even more. It was talking about countries like Vietnam and some other folks that are main producers of rice, Thailand and some other places, now kind of rationing and cutting back on their exports to be able to make sure that they can meet kind of domestic needs as the global economy shuts down. So this is another wave of just some of the things that we were looking at and encouraging folks to pay attention to around the supply chain being impacted on this, so people even learn even more about how the system actually functions and how we are all interconnected in ways that are obscured very intentionally by the capitalist system, but how we really are in one now global supply chain, connected chain, and how we all need to be struggling for the greatest degree of social emancipation everywhere. But so this is some of the things that we think we need to move towards, at least in the U.S., is to build over time, to build up the strength, and to get folks to understand that it's up to us to change society in the way that's going to benefit us. It's not up to the rulers deciding what's best for us, when they decide it's best for us, because that's going to do nothing but kill us and perpetuate, the growth inequities and inequalities that already existed that got us in this madness in the first place.
No, and I think Cooperation Jackson has been a really important demonstration that you can begin the process of building tomorrow. Tomorrow's world that we want to build it today, to build the elements of it through cooperative production and so on. I think it's really, really very, very important. I've just put up the website of Cooperation Jackson. Are there ways that we could encourage people to support the work that you are doing and helping to organize on a mass level?
You broke up a little bit on me, but I think nod your head. You said, how could folks support our work?
Yes.
You were saying? I mean, the main thing, look, the mutual aid, the relief work stuff still needs a lot of support and resourcing. So I would encourage everybody who's watching this, the mass production piece, particularly the 3D printing side of it, because we've been using that primarily to supply the folks who are on the front line in the medical field, the nurses and the doctors, and that's what that production is almost exclusively for, as well as some other folks in our community we know who have, acute respiratory disease, that we need to scale that up, and that costs money. It costs like $30 to produce on the production side one mask. So we still asking folks to donate as generous as you can. Go to our website, look for in the announcement section, look for the link that talks about that aid work that's going on and donate there. That's one particular.
We've lost him again just at the point that he was giving us information about. Anyway, go to Cooperation Jackson Um, there we are. Okay, you're back. That's much better signal as well.
Yeah.
Uh, I was going to
Okay.
put
Well,
up
hopefully it
the link.
stays this way.
I was going to put up the link to become a sustaining member but there's some kind of error there, so you might get one of your colleagues to try and fix that, because I do think it's important for people to
On
become
which one
on
says
your
there's an error?
website. On your website, become a sustainer. But have a look at that
That's
later on.
interesting. It was okay.
Yeah,
I think
maybe.
there's some we we've been getting some attacks the last 2 weeks, so
Yeah,
we'll
I
keep
suspect.
updating that.
I
But
suspect that. But it's really important for listeners to think about ways of supporting the work of Cooperation Jackson, and supporting this move towards organizing rent strikes, whatever kind of mass organizing in the time of COVID. It's going to be essential if we're to create the world that we want to live in. When and if we come out of this crisis and into a different world. Any final message that you'd like to give, Kali?
just stay tuned. Check us out. Be on the lookout for the May Day piece. Hopefully, everyone here will take that up. That's coming soon. Do everything you can to promote it, to encourage workers wherever you are, to strike in place, to stand and get together with each other, be creative, but for us to flex, our collective power on May Day, everywhere throughout the world, not just in the United States. I think this is a clear time to send a message, to our would-be rulers, those who will rule and lord over us, that those days are ending, and that we are going to take the active steps to end it. And let's get towards building a new and better world. I mean, that's our fundamental message.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kali. And maybe another conversation after the May Day actions to see how we're
Let's do it.
progressing
Let's
on.
do it.
Let's do that. But thank you for being on the show, Kali. Really, really impressed and really grateful to you for having spared the time. So continue the great struggles, comrade. Okay. We'll see you again.
We'll do. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks. Cheers. That was Kali Akuno from Cooperation Jackson. Just to let you know, he raised an important point about connections internationally. And here on Organizing in the Time of COVID-19, we've been talking to people in Uganda, in South Africa, in Kenya. We have lined up people to talk to us from Mauritius, from Haiti, from Senegal, and from Mexico and beyond. If you are organizing in any part of the world around this issue of COVID-19, and you would like to talk to us, please get in touch with us on Facebook or on Twitter. Thank you for joining us today. Feroz Manji signing off.